Ever since Apollo 17 departed the moon's surface in 1972, humanity hasn't been back. And as a matter of fact, we haven't really come close, having spent most of the last 50 years stuck in low Earth orbit. That being said, over the past decade or so, several different countries have set their sights on manned lunar exploration once more. And as it stands now, the race to get a foot back on our nearest celestial neighbor seems to be coming down to a dead heat between two of the most powerful and influential countries on the planet, the United States and China. Now, before we get into how this race has developed and who seems likely to reach the moon first, I'd appreciate if you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay tuned for future content. Okay, so before we can make any predictions about the race itself, we need to dive deeper into the two space programs taking part of it, that being the US and China. Let's start with the American space program, which has garnered a lot more attention and because the US has been to the moon before. This space program, officially named Artemis since it's the counterparts of the Apollo missions in the 1960s, was launched in 2017 and aims to get America back on the moon through 3 test launches. The first would have an unmanned probe orbit the moon, the second would do the same thing except with people actually on it, and the third would actually land people on the moon. When it was originally announced, the prediction was that NASA would be able to land people on the moon in 2024. Well, we are at the very end of 2024 right now, and nobody has made it back to the moon, so it's very obvious that something has gone wrong during the process. As it turns out, the Artemis program has been absolutely riddled with problems, delays, and setbacks, which is actually somewhat par for the course for NASA space missions in general. Only the first of the 3 test launches, that being the unmanned probe, has actually taken off, and it didn't do so until November 2022 despite originally being slated for several years earlier. These delays largely boil down to a few major factors. For instance, NASA's approach to the mission relied on the development of a lot of new technology, equipment, and systems, and it was always borderline unreasonable to expect all of it to go off without a hitch. To be specific, there appear to be 3 main things that are causing problems for the Artemis program. First of all, it relied on an entirely new rocket, the Space Launch System, or SLS for short, being developed, which today is the most powerful rocket that has ever been constructed. Developing a rocket of this size and magnitude is no easy feat, and there have been some hiccups along the way. But perhaps a much larger issue has to do with the stability of the main spacecraft's heat shield. You see, when rockets re-enter Earth's atmosphere, they do so at such an enormous speed that it generates huge amounts of friction, and therefore heat. This necessitates having some sort of protection system, that being the heat shield, that is able to safeguard anything inside. However, during the 2022 test flight, it was noted that the heat shield saw significantly more damage than intended, raising serious concerns about its viability and prompting a 2-year investigation that only recently concluded. Finally, the system for actually getting people on and off the moon itself, that being SpaceX's Starship, has hit some bumps in the road itself during its design and testing, which raised concerns that even if NASA was ready to go, SpaceX might not. With all these hiccups, the manned test flight is now predicted to happen no earlier than the spring of 2026, when the actual moon landing is slated for 2027. However, top NASA officials have said that even this schedule is wildly unrealistic given how delayed the program already is, with some predicting that the moon landing could be delayed to 2028 or even later. There have even been calls to do away with all the new systems being developed altogether, instead relying on rockets and spacecraft from companies like SpaceX that have been tried and tested for years. While a rework like this would make things significantly cheaper and easier long term, it would again delay the process by an enormous amount. This brings us to our other competitor, China. Unfortunately, we know quite a bit less about China's plans to land humans on the moon, owing to China's more secretive and tight-lipped nature about these kinds of things in general. However, the Chinese space program stated in a conference of April 2024 that they were aiming to put 2 so-called taikonauts on the moon by 2030. This may not sound like much considering the massive amount of effort and delays that the American program has experienced, but there is one extremely important thing to consider. China has had a significantly better track record with staying on schedule. Case in point, way back in 2011, they announced that they would be building a new space station, somewhat similar to the ISS, and that it would be complete in the early 2020s. The first part of the space station was launched and started operations in the middle of 2021, with construction being fully complete by the end of 2022. So it's safe to say that they nailed the schedule pretty much perfectly. China has also had a great track record of landing unmanned moon missions in the 21st century, with probes landing on the moon's far side and even bringing samples back to Earth. As a matter of fact, it is one of only 3 countries to have landed on the moon this century at all, and I'll get to the others in a bit. It is also worth mentioning that while China is using some new technology for their planned moon mission, it is nowhere near at the scale of what NASA is trying to do. In fact, the big new rocket they built, known as the Long March 10, is purported to have already finished development and is slated for a first launch in 2027. When all of this is put together, China clearly has an incredibly capable and nimble space program, and with its more realistic technology and knack for staying on schedule, a 2030 or even 2029 lunar landing from them seems far from unrealistic at the moment with what we know. So, with all of this put together, who is likely to return to the moon first? Well, it all boils down to 2 factors: whether the Artemis program continues to get delayed, and whether China's near spotless track record is able to continue. If NASA is able to pull itself together and get Americans back on the moon in 2027 or even 2028, then they'll still be the clear favorite to return even after several years of delays already. But if a major rework of the program is needed or other issues arise, it could slip to 2029 or later, which would give China an opportunity to land first provided they're able to keep their own lunar program running smoothly, which is far from a given. Finally, it is worth mentioning that China and the US are far from the only countries that are interested in lunar exploration at the moment. Remember when I said that China was one of only 3 countries to actually land on the moon in the 21st century? Well, the other 2 countries are not the US and Russia, like one may have expected, but rather India and Japan. Both countries pulled off their landings in the past year and a half, and are actively pursuing more missions that have more ambitious goals. Neither country has a set timeline for potential manned exploration like the US and China do, but one or even both of them doing so in the 2030s is not all that far-fetched. Granted, it would take significant advancements on their part and significant delays on the behalf of the US and China for them to even have a chance of returning to the moon first. But they are programs to keep in mind as the new space age accelerates. Regardless of who gets there first, a return to the moon will be a significant stepping stone in space exploration going forward, with it likely to serve as a launching point for exploring Mars, an event that could happen in the mid-2030s, or even sooner, if the ambitious goals of SpaceX's Starship are to be realized. And that's all I have to say about lunar exploration. As always, I'd appreciate like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay tuned for future content. Thanks and have a great day.